You can film an incredible dive and still come home with footage that looks shaky, flat, and forgettable. And most of the time, the problem is not your camera. It is the mistakes happening before you even press record. In this video, I'll show you the few fundamentals that actually make underwater footage look good. So you stop guessing and start getting clips you want to keep. So before we touch a single setting, let's start with the foundation that makes every shot look good. If you've ever watched a clip and felt slightly seasick just sitting on your couch, there is one reason that shows up again and again. Picture this. You line up a perfect moment. A subject glides into your view, and then your camera bounces on every kick. The moment is still there, but it looks stressful instead of cinematic. That is why we need to talk about stability first. Here's the part that most people miss. Adding a camera to your dive is task loading, meaning you are doing more jobs at once and your attention gets split. You're now managing buoyancy, situational awareness, gas consumption, and trying to frame your shot. If your buoyancy control is not solid, the camera becomes a distraction that can compromise your safety. Do not let a camera turn a safe dive into a distracted dive. Master neutral buoyancy and trim first. Then, and only then, add the camera. Using a camera while staying neutral and in trim takes more practice than most people realize. If you're looking for some tips on improving buoyancy, I got you here. Now, let's get specific on why shaky footage is unwatchable. If you want one immediate fix, stop kicking during the moment you press record. Hovering and holding a still shot is your goal. When your camera bounces with every kick, the viewer's brain has to work overtime to process all that movement, where the subject is, and where it's going, and what's happening. It triggers motion sickness and makes it impossible to focus on your subject. Digital stabilization on a camera helps a little, but the more you rely on it, the worse your footage looks. Stabilization cannot fix poor buoyancy or erratic finning. It can smooth out minor hand tremors, but if you're bobbing up and down or jerking forward with each kick, no amount of post-processing will save that footage. In addition, the heavier the stabilization is, the more your frame is cropped to compensate for the movement, which may not always be desirable. You get less composition to work with because of that stabilization. Your finning technique is not your natural gimbal. For tracking shots where you are following a subject, use a gentle modified flutter kick or frog kick. You basically want very small kicks. You can even do a normal frog kick, but you want to time it with the kicks so that you're basically in the glide phase. Keep your kicks small and controlled, focusing on smooth forward propulsion without the vertical bounce. But often you just want to hover in place, make micro adjustments, and keep your frame perfectly still. Your trim is the other half of the equation. Trim means your body position and angle in the water. When you are properly trimmed, your body stays level and your kicks propel you forward instead of pushing you up or down. Further, it's easier to control your depth while recording. For example, if you push your hand through water like this, or try and do a karate chop through water, which one is gonna move through water faster? So ideally, when you're holding vertical, if you put yourself in trim and pulled your body horizontally, you're likely going to be able to hold that position much better than if you were trying to be vertical. It just really helps with that stabilization. Smooth, controlled movement is what makes your footage look intentional. Now that you can hold that camera steady, we can finally talk about what to change in the menu. Hey, this is Don from the future, and I just wanted to tell you to like and subscribe. If you're enjoying this video, please do share with others. Check out the DiveWise Hub, which is a Patreon that has a free membership for our monthly newsletter to keep you up to date with the latest and greatest. And soon we're going to be adding some videos to the Patreon to really help hone in on some of the skills of videography to build off some of what we started in this video. If you're interested, check it out, and I'll see you there. The next problem is usually a camera menu that feels like it has 100 ways to ruin a clip. You've probably scrolled through the settings underwater, guessed and hoped for the best, and then you realize that footage is terrible. Most settings do not matter for underwater video, but we are going to focus on the few that consistently change the results, starting with the frame rate. 30 frames per second, or FPS, is generally the sweet spot for underwater footage, and it can also help with lower light because your camera can use a slower shutter speed. 60 FPS can be more ideal for large animals that tend to be moving a bit quicker, especially for panning shots where you're trying to keep up with it, requiring more motion. 60 FPS also allows limited options to slow down the footage some. 60 FPS might be a good sweet spot for you if you can spare a ton of extra memory for storage, but I generally have a preset to switch to it for motion shots strategically. It's good to have these as presets and select between them, but it's also good to keep in mind that the higher FPSs, the more light you need. Some cameras offer higher frame rates, like 120 to 240 FPS for extreme slow motion shots. These are fun for specific shots, but they need a lot of light, which means your shots likely need to be in the sun and shallow. Stick with 30 FPS as your default and only bump up when you have more of a specific reason or shot you have in mind, especially for those big animals that might be cruising by. Also keep in mind that the file sizes of your videos can be quite difficult to manage, especially when you're shooting at higher frames per second. Higher frames per second doesn't automatically mean better, and so try to use those strategically for specific shots when you see the opportunity. And just 30 FPS, for me at least, tends to be a nice default. For most divers, 1080p at 30 FPS is often plenty. Resolution is the next big decision. For most divers, 1080p at 30 FPS is usually plenty. Use 4K when you know you will crop heavily or display on a large screen, and then even have 8K if you were wanting to make thumbnails or some really interesting images from your footage. But let me tell you, those file sizes are gonna be gigantic. Now, I'm filming all the time. I have tons and tons of footage, and so I have to be very reasonable about the kind of stuff I'm keeping around. And so generally my baseline is 30 FPS at 4K. That's usually my go-to, but not everyone is doing all this editing that I do for these videos, and so maybe 1080p is probably plenty enough for you. And I haven't quite made the leap for shooting in 8K, at least not all the time yet. Now let's talk about white balance versus red filters for color correction. You can use a red filter for shallow dives in clear blue water when you're using ambient light. For the most part, most modern action cameras in the last 2 to 3 years actually do a lot of post-processing to re-add red when they sense things are a little bit blue. So they do a pretty good job as long as you bring a light. And if ambient light is there, it does a pretty good job with shots, so you generally don't need a red filter. In fact, I hardly ever dive with a red filter anymore. And if you're using video lights in general, or diving in green or murky water, you can skip the filter altogether and rely on custom white balance. And for white balance, it's generally something you can leave on automatic, and you just have to adjust whenever you change depth or the lighting changes. You can reset the white balance by carrying something white with you. It could be a slate on your arm, it could be a slate from your pocket, and you just basically have the camera on and have it sit against that white, and it'll automatically white balance to that white slate. It's a good habit to correct the white balance every 5 meters or 15 feet of depth change. Optionally, you can turn the auto white balance off and just forgo this manual task for some compromise or needing to manually adjust it. Of course, in some cameras, you might not be able to adjust it on a dive, so you have to find a nice balanced set point for your white balancing. You can generally just set your camera to around 6K for manual white balancing for a decent spot for the white balance. And this last critical setting is exposure control. Auto exposure is your underwater enemy. As you pan across the scene, the camera constantly adjusts brightness based on what is in the frame, panning from a dark reef to bright blue water, and your footage flickers as the camera tries to compensate. It looks amateurish and is distracting to watch. Set an ISO max cap before you dive to prevent your camera from cranking up the grain. For most conditions, cap ISO at 800 or push it to 1600 if you are diving deeper than 20 meters or 65 feet with limited light. This keeps your footage clean while still giving the camera room to adjust for changing scenes. Next, dial in the EV compensation to prevent blowout on your highlights when you pan across bright blue water. Start at -0.5 and go to -1 if you're diving in very clear, sunny conditions. This subtle shift stops your footage from pulsing between dark reef and overexposed water column. You usually cannot adjust these mid-dive, so test them on your first descent and commit. Now that your camera is predictable, you can finally bring that scene of yours to life. But if your video clips still look flat, even with good settings, you are running into the one thing that water steals from you faster than you can expect, but an art of its own to control. You have probably filmed a subject that looked incredible in person. Then you watch the footage and it feels dull, gray, and lifeless. That is not your camera failing. That is your lighting strategy missing one key concept. Most people buy stronger lights and still get ugly footage because they point the lights the wrong way. Light is what creates depth, reveals color, and separates your subject from the background. Let's start with what makes a good video light. Use wide video beam lights, around 90 to 120 degrees, with a temperature range around 5 to 6.5 K Kelvin. Aim for at least 1000 lumens per light. And to 2000 to 3000 is a better starting point. This ensures ample brightness with a wide light to fully illuminate what's in front of you with a soft white glow. Now here's a technique that separates good lighting from backscatter filled garbage. This is also why you want your light on an arm, so you can angle it at 30 to 45 degrees. When you point your light straight ahead in the same direction as your camera, you illuminate every particle floating in the water between you and the subject. Those particles reflect light back into your lens and create what they call backscatter, the white specks that ruin footage. By angling your lights at an angle, you are lighting your subject from the side instead of lighting the water in front of your camera. This reduces backscatter a lot, but it will not erase completely in dirty water. Speaking of which, a single light is better than no light, but dual lights give you a more even coverage from both sides to illuminate harsh shadows. Like for example, in my setup, if I'm shooting a light this way, it will give a harsh shadow on the other side of a fish's face if it's pointing straight at me. So it's more ideal to mount one light on each side of your camera and angle them outward so that they're both pointing at your subject in the center. For myself, I still tend to use a single arm even though it's not optimal, just because it's a little bit easier to handle and easier to stow. So you can still make your preferences, it just may not be as perfect footage. But your better the lighting is, especially with two lights, it creates a soft illumination that creates a professional and natural feel to your video. And here's where the team approach comes in. Your buddy's lights are not just for their own use, they can be used to help you too. If your buddy aims their light at the subject from the side and keeps it out of your frame, you can add fill light to the texture without blasting particles straight into your lens. But you have to coordinate. If your buddy shines your light directly where your camera is pointing, you're likely to get more backscatter and blown highlights. Communicate with your buddy before the dive about what you want. Also, make sure to use the right light. A narrow spotlight will only blind and oversaturate your subject. You want them to use a soft, wide angle light only. Also, at shallow depths, you have enough ambient light that you might not need artificial lights at all. Down to about 10 meters or 33 feet, natural sunlight can provide beautiful and even illumination, especially on sunny days with calm surface conditions. Position the sun at your back when possible so it's facing down on your subject. But as you go deeper, red wavelengths disappear first, then orange, and then yellow. At just 15 meters or 50 feet, everything starts looking more blue and flat without artificial light. And remember, distance matters too. A subject far away loses color even if you are shallow. The deeper you go, the more critical your lighting becomes. At 30 meters or 100 feet, your video lights are the only thing bringing color back to the scene. Now that your footage in color has depth again, the last step is making it feel like it means something. Even with perfect technique, your video can still feel boring. And that is the most painful kind of failure because nothing looks wrong. It just feels forgettable. It is usually not a gear problem. It is usually that the shots do not have a clear idea. Technical skills mean nothing if your shots are boring. Every clip should communicate one clear idea. A turtle swimming through a school of fish. A moray eel hunting at night. A diver silhouetted against the surface. A panning shot to show the dive site. And by the way, it's best to reserve panning in most cases unless you're trying to keep your subject in frame or ensuring the viewer gets an idea where you're at. Just start with simple, non-moving clips. Panning shots are specific clips that capture that movement and should be used exclusively for showing an area or keeping a subject in frame. Next is the clip length rule that separates usable footage from filler. Ideally, hold each shot between 5 to 10 seconds. Ideally. Only hold longer if there's truly something very interesting happening, and only then let it roll. Ideally, when you start your shot, you know what you're gonna get and try to plan no more than 10 seconds and generally no less than 4 to 5 seconds. Too short, and you're likely to miss a lot of the action. But too long, you will never find the action. You have to train to capture the precise clips you want. And that forces you to put a lot of thinking into the footage that you want to film before you hit record. And ideally, you'll thank yourself for years to come if you put the subject of your shot as the first frame, because you'll very clearly understand what your footage is as you're scrolling through it looking for footage to show your friends. Most software always represents a video with the first frame, so this makes it easier to organize your clips. Now, let's talk about composition. If you only steal one filming habit from this section, it is this next one. Turn on your grid overlay and keep your subject off center, either directly into center or around one of the 1/3 marks, giving it space to move into the frame. That one habit makes your shots look instantly more intentional. Use natural lines in the scene like reef edges or kelp to lead the viewer's eye toward your subject. Give your subject enough space to feel natural, but not so much that it feels lost. For a large animal like a manta ray, give it breathing breathing room to emphasize scale. For a tiny nudibranch, fill more of the frame so the viewer can see detail. Here's the principle that often matters most. Get closer. But first, understand your lens. Most action cameras come with wide-angle or fisheye lenses, which are ideal for capturing large scenes, reefs, wrecks, and big animals like sharks or mantas. They let you show the full environment and create that immersive feeling. You can also add an ultra-wide wet lens that attaches to your housing for an even wider field of view. You might be thinking that action cameras already give you a pretty wide lens. Why would you want wider? Because just think about it. With a wide lens, you can get really close to a subject, and that means less potential for particles and light dilution from your light source. And so you can get really close and really make colors pop and less particles in between you and the camera, while it still looks like your subject isn't taking the full frame. And that's the beauty of a wide lens. For tiny subjects like nudibranchs or gobies or those tiny pygmy seahorses, you need a macro lens or a wet diopter that screws onto your housing. Wet lenses are particularly useful because you can swap them out underwater, switching from wide to macro mid-dive, depending on what you encounter. Now, here is why distance matters with wide-angle lenses. Wide-angle lenses make distant subjects tiny and uninteresting. A turtle that is 3 meters or 10 feet away looks like a tiny speck. It looks close in your mask, but it looks far when you review your footage due to that wide-angle lens. That same turtle at 1 meter or 3 feet fills the frame and becomes the hero of your shot. You want it to often be 60% or more of your frame if it's your subject. For macro subjects, get even closer. Fill half the frame or even more so the viewer can see the texture and color that makes the subject interesting. The challenge is getting closer without disturbing the animal or compromising your safety. Approach slowly. Keep your movements smooth and ideally let the animal approach you, and watch the animal's body language. If it tenses up or starts to move away, you've pushed too far. Back off and let it settle before you're trying again. Patience gets you closer than aggression ever will, so do not chase. Just stay where you're at. Maybe the fish will turn around or the turtle will turn around and see, hey, you're not following it. Maybe you're not a threat, and grow some curiosity in it. When you combine these, your footage stops feeling accidental and starts feeling like a story. And that's the story you want, the story of your dive, because that's how you make every dive your adventure. And once it feels like a story, people actually want to keep watching. So go make footage you are proud to share, and do it with calm control, good judgment, and respect for the ocean. In this video, we talked about buoyancy control. That's a big one that's gonna really enhance your ability to take good video. So if you're looking to improve, check out this video next. And YouTube thinks you'd like this one up here, so maybe give that one a try. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.